Are you ready to rock, Graham?
You betcha. Let's do it. All right. Tonight we've got Edmund Marriage with us. He's the principal of the Patrick Foundation and the creator of the Golden Age Project. Thanks for joining us, Edmund.
A pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating chat. We've been really interested in these topics recently. We've had a couple guests on talking about the alternative history, let's say, and how far back it really goes. So we're looking forward to learning more about the Golden Age Project and what you've got, all the research you've done and the website that you have.
Yes, well, my work is based on the work of a marvelous man and his wife, and he's called Christian O'Brien, and his wife Barbara, who was in fact my mother's first cousin. And I literally wanted to find out about early agriculture because I was, if you like, a professional land and wildlife manager and spent most of my life working in the countryside. And so I rang him up and he said, "You come and see me." He knew a lot of the answers, and I was absolutely staggered to see the amount of work that he'd done during his retirement. But between 1972, I saw him in about 96. He died in 2000. But he wrote produced three very important books. One was called The Genius of the Few. The second was a masterwork called The Shining Ones, and the Shining Ones were exactly the same people as the Elohim, which was a word for a singular god, but in fact it was a plural word, and the Elohim were the Shining Ones, and he opened up that whole avenue of knowledge from the earliest records, which were actually the Sumerian cuneiform records, which were lodged by Professor Barton in about 1901, and Barton finished his translation in about 1915. But he only really could understand a few of the cuneiform words. Samuel Noah Kramer, the great specialist, said in 1965, he said he hoped that somebody would be able to translate the cuneiform so that we could find out what the Sumerians were saying about their history. And this is a task which Christian O'Brien took on. He's incredibly bright, clever man. He received a CBE. He had a degree at Cambridge, and he became the head of the oil operating companies in Iran because of not only a great success in discovering oil in Canada for BP, but also the oil in Libya. So he was a brilliant specialist archaeologist and in terms of understanding geology, he was light years ahead of most people.
How did he get interested in the mysteries and the tablets?
Well, he always had that feeling of wanting to learn more about all the subjects he was dealing with. And what he really realized was that we had a fantastic history about the human race, which has lodged with the people who settled in the area of the Tigris and Euphrates about 5000 BC. And from that area, we get the migrations to China, and we get 100 words of English are basically Sumerian words. So that was a very important point. But we had to go back and look much further to southern Lebanon to see where these stories came from and who the people were who produced that information. And they were called the Elohim. They had a settlement west of Mount Hermon in a high montane plain with a reservoir and lakes and canals. And the basic story of the Garden of Eden and the river going out the story really was about the irrigation channel being parted into sluices and irrigating the area, which was very fertile and rich for farming. And that was really the story of the Garden of Eden and the river that went out of Eden into the garden. And the cuneiform records gave us very accurate, unbiased, practical information about farming, dealing with people, dealing with problems, dealing with livestock, dealing with the local tribesmen, etc. So for the first time ever on this planet in recent times, we actually had a very detailed record of really clever people restarting agriculture and civilization around about the end of the Younger Dryas, which was 9,500 BC. And the two key sites were at Jericho, which is the oldest town, and the Levantine corridor, where we find nearly all the domesticated crops and animals, and the site below Mount Hermon, which was their headquarters, high up, well protected from floods and weather, but extremely rich soil, and a place where everything started as far as the Elohim were concerned. And of course, in our biblical records, we talk about the gods, but the gods were the shining ones, the Elohim, the watchers, and the angels. In fact, the word angel actually means, it translates as Engeli, which means lords of the cultivation. Watchers were a third order of craftsmen, and you had others involved, but it was a very disciplined group of people who learned very well the importance of surviving and making sure that agriculture thrived, because that was the means of feeding people. During the great Younger Dryas Ice Age, at places like Göbekli Tepe, which was one of their bases, they had to live off hunting animals, killing animals that were in the valley below, which they could see on the migration routes. So the very first job they had then was to be hunter-gatherers and find the antelopes and the animals that survived the very cold weather, and collect the meat and eat that meat as their principal source of food. They clearly had been operating very efficiently much earlier on the planet, and the primary source for that was the area of the Azores. And this is an area which Christian O'Brien spent 7 months in total looking at all the geological features and using the Portuguese undersea charts and identifying the area of the Azores, an area of land above sea level, the size of Spain, which was in fact the island of Atlantis. That's a very important point, because a lot of people have touched on it, but he was the first person with the what I call the necessary skills to make an assessment, and finding hanging riverbeds, for example, which showed that the whole area had sunk, in the south by 4,000 feet, and in the north by 2,000 feet. And that sunk at about, I think probably the date was 10,850, when we were hit by a massive salvo of heavy cometary debris coming in over the North Pole area.
The Taurids?
Yes, that's right. It's part of the Taurids probably. But there was a supernova explosion, very well recorded now by Richard Firestone and his team, of a supernova explosion at 40,000 BC. And that led to a flash which killed all the large mammals and animals at that date to 40,000 BC, and we lose the very large mammals in the Australian area because that was a side which was hit by this terrible flash. And then we get the several stages of debris, and finally the really large lumps of rock, massive lumps of rock coming in over the Hudson Bay area, creating very large impacts in east of the Hudson Bay and in Scandinavia, and objects coming into the Atlantic, creating the Carolina Bays. And I think a lot of the geologists have probably walked around in Canada and seen the very large lumps of rock which were blown out of the ground and delivered several hundred miles away at that particular time. That is very well established. Many geologists now have accepted that. And that was a key turning point at that particular time.
Geez, Darren, this sounds like exactly what Randall Carlson's been talking about. But I don't remember Randall mentioning Christopher O'Brien's work. But
well, I know. Well, his theory lends definitely to the comet impacts, and I think they found a couple in Greenland too, if I'm not mistaken. They found a 22-mile and a 21-mile diameter impact craters under the ice, which are probably from that same event, or from a sister event on a different time around the cycle.
yeah,
But it's that same sort of thing, and the reason that he's equating to the Azores being able to sink that 2,000 or 4,000 feet or more is due to the fact that those ice sheets disappearing off of the northern hemisphere and dumping into the ocean, which is causing the land to come up more because of isostatic depression, and the seabeds to sink more because of the trillions of tons of mass transfer.
Right. And then you mentioned, Edmund, before we started recording that Christopher O'Brien was out in the Rockies checking out how far the Rockies had moved in 60 million years. But Randall also mentions that one of the big rocks that was located down south of Calgary here, in a place, I think it's called, is it called Big Rock? The Big Rock, right? It's a big erratic that came from Mount Robson, like in the Rocky Mountains, kind of west of Jasper.
Yeah, I've got a picture of one of those very big rocks. It's about the same time as the Carolina Bays, and lots of evidence. And of course, the whole of the Canada and America was subject to massive floods when the ice water melted, Lake Aggies, for example. And some of the specialists say that the whole of the United States was sculpted by water in a very short space of time.
Right. So the other thing I want to mention about the cuneiform translations and the beginning of the reintroduction of agriculture, wasn't it very peaceful back then too? I thought I read something in your documents that had that it was a sort of a very peaceful sort of one, not necessarily one religion, but more of a based on peaceful spiritual principles.
Yeah, this is a subject which has come up because one of the things that we know is that the Druid origins were in southern Lebanon. We hear in the records that they were missionaries from Sidon.
Wow.
And the very interesting point is that when the Druids are studied, you find that there's a tremendous sophistication and knowledge there. They've been rubbished by so many people and nobody understands it. It's just lost it over time. But the important thing to remember about Druids is that they were people whose job essentially was to stop people fighting and stop war happening. And even the women had that power of standing between two armies. And they'd say, if you want to fight, let's have the leaders and you can have a single combat in front of your armies, and we'll see who wins it. In other words, it was such an important part of civilization that people did not fight because it was totally destructive, and it caused so much suffering. And we, of course, have fallen into that trap over the last 3,000 years or more.
So where do we go from here? I mean, the Druids in southern. When you say southern Lebanon, is that Lebanon as it is today? Like it's still part of? So it'd be right near Israel and Lebanon, kind of thing.
Yeah, the Shining One's knowledge spread out from that site below Mount Hermon, and they had tremendous influence because we find them traveling all around the world. And Bradley Lepper, who was one of the great agricultural specialists from Ohio University, made the point that they'd taken farming and all the domesticated crops and animals as well, that got them around the world within a period of 2,000 years. In other words, 9,500 to 7,500, and they're literally spread around the world. And you have one of the senior Shining Ones in China, Fuxi he was called, and you have extraordinary progress made, and it took pretty clever people to, number one, produce or carry down with them the important domesticated crops, which are quite different from wild crops. And when we look at that, we can find all sorts of interesting things, like maize pollen being found in a lake bed across the Levantine corridor, very close to Mount Hermon, dated at 7,500 BC by two fantastically qualified botanists called Botemer and Zeist. And they lost their reputations simply because all the other people said, oh, it's impossible. We got lots of stories like that. I'll also come back to Victor Klube, who was the professor at Oxford University responsible for astronomy, etc. And he was a key figure in identifying the Taurid streams and the cycles of the Taurid streams, which are about 2,000 years. And that's very interesting because we can see that more or less every 2,000 years, that Taurid stream comes back and creates real problems.
When was the last time it was here?
The last time the Taurid streams came in was about 2,000 years ago.
Of course.
So we're at high risk now, according to Victor Klube, and I think he's right. And if we go back another 2,000 years, we're very close to the pyramid time.
And the Bronze Age collapse too?
Yeah. And why did they go to all that trouble to build pyramids, which nearly all of them, apart from the Great Pyramid, had massive space inside for people to go and take cover. And that was a very good reason for them to spend all the money they had, because they thought they could have a major wipeout. And so that's just one of the interesting things. And you see, we had a lot of pyramid building at about 1,200 BC, particularly on the American continent and in Mexico. And so our ancestors were aware of these cyclical problems, and that explains so much of the work that was carried out so that people could take cover from those kind of cometary impacts. And our whole of our Earth's history has been influenced by what is thrown at us from space. And it's very important.
That's very interesting. I mean, you mentioned on your website about the Austria, I guess the mountains in Austria were they were hit, and that might have caused some, because we were talking about that on the show not too long ago about the Bronze Age collapse and trying to look for some sort of, I don't know what the mainstream narrative is on why that happened, but it seems to still be a mystery. But didn't you mention something about that impact?
Yes, that was the Kofels impact, which was 3,125, and that was a massive impact. There may have been other areas which we don't know about, uninhabited areas. But if we actually look at all the big impacts and go back, we've got this 2,000 or so year cycle. And this is what Professor Victor Klube has identified. And is quite rightly warning us that we should be prepared for the return of the terror from the skies.
So it's not every 13,000 years; it's every 2,000 years.
Yeah, but his cycle is about 2,200, but
where are we at?
We're at that now. We're
due?
According to that, we're at a higher risk now than we've been for a long while of more problems.
Southern hemisphere and northern hemisphere.
Yeah, well, we don't know where it's going to create problems, but it's an area where we should have a lot more people doing a lot more work and beginning to try and understand, at least go as far as Victor Klube understood.
It's interesting because Rome disappears, right? Rome disappears like 2,000 years ago, 2,200 years ago. And there seems to be some weird like evidence for it to be buried in places, which there's not a conventional explanation for. We do know that there's a crazy temperature drop after that, which an impact would also explain.
Yeah, we have these cycles, which are red hot subject at the moment, because we've got a situation whereby we're all being led to believe that it's going to get very, very hot, and that the climate is the real problem, and we've got to change it, as if we could ever change our climate. And the key point is being resolved by the Danish Space Agency, which Heinrich Svansmark, and he wrote a book with the science editor of a Telegraph, and it's called The Chilling Stars. Excellent reading for anybody who really wants to understand climate change. And he was associating a changing climate with the disappearance of sunspots and the increase of cosmic radiation. And that the cosmic radiation, when it increases, creates larger water droplets and much heavier rainfall, which eventually leads to the cooling of the seas and the changing of the ocean currents. And that puts us into what's called a Maunder minimum, very cold period. And what we're looking at over the last 2 or 3 years is the sun absolutely quiet, no sunspots, a big increase in cosmic radiation, and a big increase in rainfall, if you haven't noticed it. And so that's one of the areas which is being totally ignored. And the other, of course, crazy idea is that we can, CO2 is a problem. Man-made CO2 is a tiny percentage of the total. And it's nonsense to suggest that we could have net zero carbon. And people are waking up to the fact that we haven't got any money anyway to spend on it in reality, because we've had our COVID problems, etc. And we've got an awful lot of silly politicians who want to spend more and more money to attract more and more votes. And they don't seem to care what happens if money is wasted, or projects are put into place which have no benefit for mankind.
I mean, what scares me is that it's not. I mean, I agree with all of what you're saying. I mean, this is what we talked about before too, with guys like Randall. I mean, it's exactly what he's been saying. I mean, if we go to Contact in the Castle in the UK, which hopefully one day we get out there, we want to do some tours around some cathedrals and castles. You're going to have to join us out there. That'd be fantastic. But the
Well, I mean, more. I mean, we're talking about going to the Azores. I mean, it seems like that would probably be a better fit. I mean, we're in the middle right now of trying to figure out the logistics of going with Randall Carlson looking for Atlantis in the Azores.
yeah, right. Forgot about that. I still want to do the castle trip too.
Doesn't look like the UK is going to let us in anytime soon.
Right. But what scares me is that people in power must know about these cycles, and they must know about the Torrid, and they must make. Why can't we be tracking it now? Like, why can't we get? We can track all these satellites and all these UFOs and all these other things. Why can't we track the Torrid?
Well, good question, because unfortunately, I've been involved in politics in much as I've been on the outside, and I've been at one or two jobs linking with the members of Parliament.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
And the issue really is that it's a funny business being a politician, because you're looking forward to being elected, you're looking forward to a damn good salary, and you're looking forward to being able to retire with a good pension. And that isn't conducive to making a nuisance of yourself with your other MPs. So if you want to run a country into the ground, you let too many of the wrong people into Parliament. And that's, of course, what we've done. We've actually diminished the importance of our constitution that requires a balance between the House of Lords, the Crown, and the Commons. And people forget that the Crown is there to represent the best interest of the people. But in reality, the House of Lords has been overruled by the Commons and diminished by the Commons, because that's the way you win your friends, by promoting them to the House of Lords, basically. And it all leads to incompetence in just about every single department of government, which is a tragedy. If our constitution was properly applied, and we would be looking for our very best people to represent the situation in the Lords, to represent the service to the Crown and the Commons, then we'd have a chance. But we've blown that basic procedure where we led the world in some degree of stability. And if we don't get back to what it was planned to be, I don't know where we're going, because it just seems to be getting worse day by day. I keep reading a Telegraph every day in this country. And I'm finding myself getting very hot under the collar and worked up at what I regard as utterly crazy people doing utterly crazy things.
It's not only there. I mean, this is happening everywhere.
It's a worldwide
Canada's
phenomenon.
just as bad. The States is in some ways it's worse. In some ways it's a little better for freedom, but it seems to be happening everywhere. It seems to be the plan. I mean, that's what. So I mean, I don't want to get too conspiratorial, but knowing, sort of having these links to the government for you, and having, and we haven't done any episodes on the deep underground bases and all, but it does seem like there's a lot of people talking about the underground facilities, and it seems to me like the elites know something is catastrophe is kind of on the horizon, but we never really get to be part of that sort of planning. It just seems like it'll happen. They've got their underground bases. They've got their, they know about these torrid cycles. They know about all this esoteric stuff, I think.
Yes, my route to, because I have to do things, my route is to go to what we have in this country, which is called a National Audit Office. And their job is to look at all the money that government spends and to tell the government that it's wasting money. And it's a safety valve. And I'm finding that they're being very responsive to quite a lot of the things I'm throwing at them. And that's my only hope, really, because I've given up trying to get politicians to even sit down and think about anything controversial because they worry about losing their seat or their position in Parliament.
Especially nowadays with this cancel culture. If you go away from, I feel like this is what's happening with science in general, and doctors, and they can't. We're at the peak of this cancel culture and the censorship, and it's affecting the doctors and scientists and politicians from just being honest or themselves because they're afraid of being canceled.
Yeah, it's we want all the good people we can find to grab these problems and sort them out, because I think we're not going to go anywhere sensible until we actually get much better people running things. This is what it boils down to.
So let's talk a little bit about the book again, the books again, and your website, and get away from the politics for a sec. Like the what's the main theme? Is there a few main themes, like religious, or evolution, or human evolution, and obviously scientific, advanced humans? Like, what are some of the themes about how the information in Christopher O'Brien's books and your website differs from our mainstream narrative?
Yes, that's right. And that's the exciting part for me, because we can learn so much from history and the past. If we're prepared to really look at it. I had a very successful broadcast 2 weeks ago, and we had a terrific response in terms of buying books and things. And I think that the tide has turned. I think we want to look at the truth about our history that's been passed down to us, and by understanding that there was an advanced civilization who had sorted out all these problems in the past, and they were the Elohim, the angels, etc. But of course their story got completely mangled, and so it's no real value. And we've got so many religions fighting each other now. When we actually do what O'Brien did, was to look at that history, we actually can learn so much about what we should be doing and where everything's gone wrong. And that's what I hope will happen. And we had a terrific response 2 weeks ago to the O'Brien's books, particularly the shining ones. I hope that will continue, because we really need to learn the truth about the past and not pick up on all the half-truths which are thrown at us from the time we first go to school to the time we leave our universities.
Yeah. So how about the religious aspect? The Jesus and his brother Thomas, and them actually being, into soul yoga, and like there's some fascinating religious ramifications too, right? Like Jesus from being involved with the kings of Britain back then. I mean, there's all kinds of information that is fascinating.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've picked up and I found it very exciting. You start actually with Jesus's speech on the Sermon of the Mount, which is one of the very earliest things he did on the edge of the Lake Galilee. And one of the great scholars on Druids was I'm forgetting his name, but he wrote a book on St. Paul in Britain, and his name was the Reverend R.W. Morgan, in about 1860. Incredible man, incredible knowledge. And he did the best work on explaining what the Druids taught, what they did, all about them. And one of the things he identified very clearly was that the Sermon on the Mount was pure Druidism. In other words, here's a chap called Jesus coming along and giving a presentation which was pure, unadulterated Druid teaching. So you have to ask the question, where did he learn it? Who taught him? How did he come to be in that position? And if we look at the interesting story, we find that he could only possibly have learnt that in Britain, and learning it from a very high position in Britain. And of course, when he arrived in Judea, even his relatives didn't recognize him. John the Baptist didn't recognize him. And it's my belief that he was sent to Britain by the Roman Emperor Tiberius Caesar to try and bring peace in the whole area of Palestine and Judea. And so we suddenly find links with the court of Augustus in Rome, and we find a story whereby, fortunately, I was handed a pre-800 BC genealogy. I was very close working with somebody called Lawrence Gardner, and this pre-800 genealogy came into my possession, and it opened up a whole range of interesting issues. That Joseph of Arimathea was in fact Joseph Har Ramatheo, exalted of a god, which was a title given to the family by the Roman emperors for running the trade routes for the Romans. And then you find that Mary was a princess on the line of David, and Joseph Har Ramatheo, in fact, went back to Moses, and you find that they're the aristocrats rather than people who lived down on the ground. And you can begin to put together a wonderful picture of what was happening, which makes so much more sense than what we're being taught by all the various religions. So we have a situation where the court of Herod had apartments at the court of Augustus. And we find that Tiberius Caesar, on his return from campaigns in Germany in AD 8, was in the building at the same time as Joseph Ward Mary. And there was a liaison which produced twins, which was Jesus and Thomas. And they were eventually, not only were they incredibly well educated at the court of Augustus, and Jesus was the favorite of Augustus, but the sons of the most important king in Britain were killed fighting in Germany with Tiberius Caesar's father. And their father was Tenvantius, who was the most important king in Britain, who had opened up the trade with the Romans. He was based at Wheathampstead, and the boys went to be adopted by him at Wheathampstead. One of the first things Jesus did at the age of 16, 17 was led troops and made peace with the Trinovantes, who were based at Colchester. And then you had a situation where Jesus and Thomas and the children of Jesus played very important roles in partly Romanizing Britain, but certainly bringing peace to Britain. And Jesus was so highly thought of by the Druids that when he became eligible for kingship on the death of Tenvantius at the age of 80, they promoted him to Pendragon, King of Kings of the Britannic Isle. And we have a wonderful story there which I hope people eventually will absorb and get used to once they realize that what we've been told isn't strictly correct.
Darren, you might be able to formulate my question a little better about the Roman stuff, but Edmund, do you think that the Romans do you think that they created a lot of the stuff that they say they created, that it's said they created, or do you think that they might have inherited a lot of this infrastructure from past advanced civilizations?
Well, I think the architecture and their ambitions and their common sense, there were a lot of very clever, sensible people putting up wonderful buildings, building canals, building aqueducts, and shipbuilding too was a feature, although it was Joseph Harama's family who weren't just running the trade routes for the Romans, but they were involved in the shipyards and also the cedar forests, particularly at Joppa, which is now called Jaffa. And Jesus' half-brother ran that shipyard later on. And Thomas learnt all the practical skills of the Essene, including shipwork, stonework, etc. That's why he's patron saint of masons. And there was a time where Jesus and Thomas were in India, and Taxila, which is a center of Buddhism, were the king who covered the whole of that area. And where the king, first of all, he mistook Jesus for Thomas because they were so alike. And he asked Thomas what he could do, and Thomas said, I can build you a palace, and I can furnish it. That's basically what he did in southern India. He built 7 churches. Jesus and Thomas were very important because they were the people who pushed what's called the Eastern Church. It's a church which was based originally at Edessa. And they were prominent in promoting their version of Christianity, which was very close to the British Druid tradition. I did make contact with a marvelous man called Hugh McGregor Ross, who was a specialist in Thomas's work. And he made the point that in the Acts of Thomas, if you go and look at it, it's in St. Catherine's Monastery Library. It makes it perfectly clear that Thomas was having regular meetings with Jesus in India. A church vicar went to record that in about 1904, and instead of translating it correctly, he changed it to that Thomas was having regular visions of Jesus. That is an example of how the church has pushed its own line and distorted extremely important truths which we should all know about. The other thing too is, of course, the crucifixion. We've actually have, I think, about 5 of the major historians contemporary with Jesus, who all said that Jesus survived the crucifixion and within days or weeks was teaching his inner circle of disciples, who were in fact men and women. And I can go on for a long while on this. The other interesting point while we're talking about St. Catherine's Monastery is that Muhammad came to that area because the trade routes and the whole concept of what he was doing, he actually went to St. Catherine's Monastery to learn as much as he could about the teachings of the Eastern Church, as it was. So we've got another wonderful story there in terms of peeling back misinformation. and realizing, in fact, that Jesus lived to about 80 years of age. He had 6 children in Britain, 3 children with Mary Magdalene, and 3 children with his final wife in Kashmir.
But why do you think they want to? Is this being sort of covered up a little bit at a time as we go along through history, or is it intentionally like sort of one big cover up? I mean, whether it's about advanced civilizations before the Younger Dryas, or about this religious kind of cover up. What are your thoughts on why and how big is it?
Well, I've been lucky because I've been able to spend a hell of a lot of time reading and researching, and I just love doing that. And my life has been, I was trained as a land and wildlife manager, a chartered surveyor, I'm a farm manager. I was involved in all the countryside issues. And when I rang up Christian O'Brien to find out what he was up to, I got the bug. And so I just love looking at history and trying to work out what's right and what's wrong. Because that's something you have to do if you want to be successful as a farmer. But we mustn't criticize people. We've got to be constructive. The worst possible thing people can do is fight one another, or challenge one another in a destructive way. And it's so important that our children are educated and have open minds and made to look for the truth, search for the truth if they can. You can't always find the truth, let's face it. But working it out and doing a lot of reading and research is actually very rewarding, but you mustn't carry too much baggage with you on that journey. You've got to be prepared to look at all the various angles. And I found the whole story of Jesus and Thomas in Britain and then what they did afterwards absolutely incredible, because everything fits beautifully into a pattern that makes sense. And so I'm quite confident in sitting here and saying what I think about the situation.
That's a good advice. So instead of worrying about why it happened and who did it and how big the problem is, you're shining the light on the truth and saying, hey, this is what we've found, and then instead, be constructive, put that all together, and hopefully people will see it from that end instead.
Yeah, well, that's rewarding, and if you can get some of it right, it's extremely rewarding. So there we are. I've put a lot of stuff on YouTube. I've got a lot more to go on, and I'm still doing a lot of reading and researching, and I shall continue to do that. And I think that somebody once said that history is the only true psychology and the true philosophy, and so I think history is important.
So what can you maybe run through before we let you go? Your website is a it's a tome of information. It's got books and indexes, and can you sort of guide people a little bit through that on how much extra research you've done and the books and stuff that you recommend, and you know what I mean?
The website, which is now 20 years old, and we haven't had to change much, but it's going to have a major revamp. And a lot of people contributing information. And so as we sell books and get some money in the pot, we're going to concentrate on improving that website. But it's called Golden Age Project.org.uk. Just to put Golden Age Project and you'll probably find it, and have a look at the YouTube presentations. And there's an awful lot of material there, a lot of contributions made by other people. And that will be gradually growing over time. The key books are the O'Brien books. The first read is The Genius of the Few, which is the genius of the Elohim and all they did in the Lebanon area, and puts that picture very, very clearly, and explains, adds an awful lot of stuff. For example, they had a standard unit of measurement which we still use today.
Is that a yard?
Would
Would that be like the Egyptian yard?
Yeah, it's the
megalithic yard.
Yes, it's the same thing as the Egyptian one. It's a Raman rectangle on which all measurement has been based literally since about 9000 BC. And that's a key point. It's detailed in the book, and it ties in with Egyptian measurements. But we've also got a lot of other interesting stuff. We've got Professor Hapgood's works, very important, where he calculated that the Earth had been mapped in great detail in very early times, and obviously from the air. And that was confirmed by somebody called Rita Brooks and others. We also have a letter which I send out with the books now, of a letter from the head of the Atomic Energy Commission at Harwell, a man called Diamond, confirming with Hapgood that the Phoenicians at 6000 BC were able to heat gold and produce pure gold at 6,000 degrees, which we've only just been able to do. And then you can go along with the Abraham work and look at fruit fly chromosomes on the wall at Catalhayak, 6,500 BC. And I can go on, and I won't any longer, but there are loads and loads of items which are coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, from our history to show that our ancestors had brought this knowledge down from the shiny ones.
From the shiny ones. So any evidence of where the shiny ones come through? Because I'm starting to get some crazy ideas about the moon lately.
Yeah, O'Brien kept an open mind on this. They certainly had the ability to take to the air, hence the surveying from the air, which is self-evident from people like Professor Hapgood and all the map making and other features. The point, I prefer to regard them as people who developed on this planet, and because I think it makes more sense. There's so much rubbish being talked about spacemen and Nibiru and you name it. I think we've got to keep our feet on the ground. One of the things I like the story of, which I sometimes tell, is McManaman in the Isle of Man, who had a mystery school in the Isle of Man, and Quetzalcoatl in Mexico. They had ships which had no sails or oars, but went wherever they wanted to go. Just one of the stories. And you get so much material like this, which is very, very valuable, very useful. The NASCAR lines, you've got a spider, which you can only see through a microscope. It has this reproductive organ on the end of its leg. But that's drawn very clearly in the NASCAR lines. So whoever drew it, been behind a microscope and recognized that cave spider as being special and having its reproductive organ on the end of its leg.
Can you get into more information on the Isle of Man mystery school? I think my dad thinks his relatives were from there way back when, or there's some sort of relation for my dad and the Isle of Man.
Yeah.
Mystery
well, I think that there's a wonderful historian called Barry Dunford who lives in Scotland and identified Forthingall as a Druid academy. It was where Pontius Pilate was sent from Europe to learn all about Druidism. But he felt that there was a lot more influence in Northern England and Northern Ireland at much earlier dates, which I think makes a lot of sense. The Isle of Man, McManaman ran a mystery school as part of the earliest history. And of course, there are very strong links with Ireland and Irish history and Newgrange and Nath, etc. And I'm actually planning to go to the Isle of Man, at least to go and look at the site of the mystery school on the southern tip of the Isle of Man, if it's still there, hasn't gone into the sea.
Where is that again? Part of my ignorance. Is that like off the UK someplace?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's right off the coast.
Is that where there's that like weird random temple in the middle of nowhere and there's like fuck all else there?
Yeah.
And we were thinking that Doggerland, like, that was probably made when there was no water in that area, right? When Doggerland was filled with, when there was, you could go from Denmark to the UK by land.
Well, that's another interesting point, because we know that about 6000 BC, the North Sea entered an area of land and flooded it all. But we've only got to look at our continental shelves of America, of Europe, and of Africa. And we mentioned Atlantis before, but two great professionals, Alan and Dallaire, Derek Allen and Bernard Dallaire, produced a very clear map of how much the Earth's oceans and crusts have been exposed. And he actually made the point that the Africa was actually joined to Atlantis, and that you can see a whole new tapestry of land and buildings, etc., under the water. Not so much buildings, but the whole of the Earth crust, so to speak, has been moved fairly dramatically. Even the Andes have been lifted by many thousands of feet. And so that's another area where we can put our hats on and try and think what it was like for the people 20,000 BC, 80,000 BC, 200,000 BC. It's a moving planet, basically.
So, Darren, were you asking kind of about what the shining ones were? Did you say something about that?
No. Well, I mean, all right. I think that.
You were getting to the moon.
I'm getting to the moon because, I mean, the further I look at the moon, the more clearly it seems to be either
Fake.
A, manufactured, or B, like it's not relativity and there's some sort of size ratio, or it's like there's just some crazy synchronicities with the moon. I mean, the fact that it's the same size as the sun in our night sky, even though one's 400 times farther away, but the moon's 400 times smaller. But I mean, that's nothing compared to getting down to the little things like, so the moon, a lunar rotation is 27.3 days, 27.3 Earth days. The moon is also 27.321% the size of the Earth. Then you've got an Earth rotation around the sun is 366.259 days. And the Earth is 366.175% the size of the moon. I mean, there's no chance that is either A, not intelligent design of some kind. Doesn't have to be a god or gods. It could be maybe a simulation or I don't know. Maybe that's how the universe works. But then you get into the other weird things, like the moon is 108 moon diameters away from Earth, or 109 or something like that, and the sun's 109 sun diameters away from Earth, and the sun's 109 times bigger than the Earth, and I'm just wondering how that's kind of where I'm getting to on the moon, because I'm starting to think there's evidence that there might have been a retreat to the moon from that Atlantean civilization when they seen the civilization ending impacts coming that were possibly the Younger Dryas.
Yeah, what would we do without the moon? The moon's absolutely essential for the tides and so many features. It makes the Earth, doesn't it? So it is an extraordinary coincidence, really. I think it's probably right to look at it that way, but I don't know. I prefer. I think it's very, very interesting, and I think you're right to make all those points, and for us to realise that what would it be like on this planet without the moon? And one says, "Oh, well, must have been such clever people that they put it there." But anyway, I don't like going into areas where I cannot back up my thoughts. I like to have good evidence. And the only evidence we know, or the best evidence we have, is that it's incredibly important for all the functions on this planet.
So would you be, if say a few of us were going to the Azores with a bunch of people to go look for Atlantis, is that something you would entertain?
Yes, but I would suggest you look at chapter 18 on the Shining Ones, which you can actually see a section of that on the website, goldenageproject.org.uk, and you can see all the various comments and work that O'Brien did, and that is all there to be read in the book or looked at on the website. I think that I first put it up in about 2004. And I know that most of Graham Hancock's people picked it up straight away and were telling me that, oh yes, Atlantis was on the Azores, which of course O'Brien established that it was. So it's all there to be looked at without going there. It's a very interesting island anyway, but you need to go along a new road and look up at the cliff to see the hanging river, which is 120 foot wide with waterborne boulders. And a geologist will tell you, looking at that, which you could see after the road had been built, that river must have drained an area the size of Spain. And that's on San Miguel. So the geological features are there and explained very well by O'Brien. But you'd still have a good holiday and some nice deep sea fishing if you went to the Azores.
Sounds excellent.
So what about there's so many books on your website and information that people can go browse, but are any of those on audio or is there any plan on getting some of those books on audio or is there?
Well, I've got a lot of them now. There's a lot of books now going in ebook form. I'm trying to get as many of the books as ebooks because a lot of people want that, like that, and they're selling quite well, and so they can even buy a Shining Ones, which is a 750 pages beautiful book, hardback. It's £49.50 new, but you can get an ebook for £16. So for 16 quid, you can have a fantastic source of knowledge from Christian O'Brien. So I try.
Who's got the rights to those books?
I have.
Do you? Would you, if you're interested in doing it on audio, we'll talk to you about it.
Yeah.
Because Darren is a great editor. We publish audiobooks too, so it would be good to get some of these ancient sort of alternative history books on audio for people. Yes.
No, I'd be very happy to make suggestions there. And this is what people want to do. And with technology as it is, it's terrific.
Yeah.
I get a lot of ebooks. I've got quite a big library of ebooks, and I see something that looks important. No trouble paying £7 or £8 or whatever, to get that on my memory bank, if you like.
Yeah, yeah. Searchable, your searchable memory bank.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so valuable having a lot to read. I know it's time consuming, but it is important to do your homework and read really good books and stick to books which where you have a chance of learning something. That's really what it boils down to.
Do you have any thoughts on Stitchin versus O'Brien?
Yeah, I've met Zechariah, and I've had conversations with Zechariah. He was very put out that somebody was challenging him. He used a lot of inventions. I made a long list, actually, at one point in time. And his attitude when I met him and talked with him was, "Oh, I got there first," sort of thing.
Yeah.
I really didn't want to take it any further than that. The point is that O'Brien was a Cambridge scholar, incredibly successful as an exploration geologist, a man of very high morals and enormous interest in the truth. And that was his work. I felt that Zechariah was talking about 1950s space technology. So much of his material, in my opinion, just didn't stack up, didn't make sense. Nibiru, have we ever found Nibiru yet? Does it really make sense? And of course, what he was translating, and I went through this, was when he said that the gods went to Nibiru, what actually he was taking a translation of Sumerian where the gods went to Nippur. And so he was confusing Nibiru with Nippur, which was the seat of the gods. It was the most important place for the Sumerian gods, and it was a Nippur temple library where these very important documents were found by John Haynes' expedition from University of Pennsylvania in 1996 to 98. And that were the key documents which told us all about the Shining Ones, or the Elohim. There were lots of other issues which I think let Sitchin down, but he made a lot of money, sold a lot of books, we all do our bit. And in those days, there weren't many people there to challenge him. No, the search for the truth is very, very important. And you diminish your reputation if you are fudging it or inventing stuff which doesn't make much sense.
Well said.
I agree. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on the show, Edmund. And do you have a website or something where our listeners can track you down if they want to follow your stuff? I guess I think you gave it out a little earlier, but one more time, can we highlight that?
Yes, it's www.goldenageproject.org.uk, and you can get me by going into that website and communicating. It's called the Golden Age Project because it's my belief, and I'm sure Christian O'Brien's belief, that with this knowledge we now have, we really can create a much better world, and we can solve many of the world's problems by learning from history, and that's really what it's all about.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks for staying up late across the pond. We really appreciate it.
Well, it's a great pleasure, and thank you so much for asking me to join in the show.
No problem. We'll talk again soon for sure.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks, Darren.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Graham.
See ya.
Yes.
And that was
chat.
our chat with Edmund Married. What'd you think, buddy?
Yeah, it's good. I'd recommend going to his website, the Shining Ones books, and the Genius of the Few, and all that. But there's also just a lot of information on the site as well that people will like. There's a key documents area there where they got Earth Under Fire and the ancient sea kings and God's credentials, Druidic philosophy. Then there's ancient cities like Karsag and Eden and the Survey of Atlantis and the history of writing, words of wisdom. I mean, it's really cool.
We encourage everyone to go check that stuff out. Big thanks to Edmund for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Head on over to grimerica.ca/support if you are getting a little bit of value from our little podcast over here. It's adding a little bit of value to your commute or to your workout or, wherever you listen to the show, however you listen. If it's worth $1 a month, $2 a month, $10 a month, you decide. Head over to grimerica.ca/support today. Sign up, support that value for value system model. Support us financially if you can. It helps us pay the bills, keep the show going, expand, do great things, hopefully. Graham doesn't work anymore, so we need to support his ass. Of course, there's a bunch of ways in the show notes you can help the whatever we're up to here, the hegemony, without spending any money. You can view the show, share the show, tell your friends about the show, join the chat, spam Graham.
I think now more than any time, it's important to share the show. Like this is the time that we need to, because marketing and there's not a lot of marketing.
We're shadow banned everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
not even shadow banned anymore. Now they're just like straight up told us that they're limiting our posts.
Yeah. So that's really the main. It's not like we have a bunch of marketing avenues. So it's really word of mouth. And we really appreciate you guys telling your friends about it.
And we love you, motherfuckers. Check out contact@thecabin.com for the trips. Grimerica.ca/chats for the chats. Grimerica.ca/social for the socials. Grimerica.com for the spams. We love you. Thanks for listening. And we will see you next week. Are you still live?
Cool.
Okay, so we got the other. We got Michael Wan. That's 6, right?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just gonna check.
He's a star chart guy, right?
Oh, he sent some slides to you too.
Yeah, I'll figure those out.
Okay.
Okay, we'll jump back on here in 30.
Sure.
All right, guys, thanks for tuning into the live show. We'll be back in 30 minutes for some Grimerica Outlawed action with Michael Wan. Of course, that won't be on the YouTube. If you're watching on the YouTube, it will only be on the Rockfin, rockfin.com/Grimerica. You do need a free account over there, but it'll be streamed for free. So head over there. YouTube has already banned the Grimerica Outlawed channel. It happened inside. It took like 8 episodes. So rockfin.com/Grimerica. See you there, 6 o'clock-ish. We're usually a little late.